So now we have time for questions and comments. Again, we collect a few questions and then give the presenters the opportunity to answer. Yes, a lot of questions. Do we have the mobile microphones? Yes, excellent. Okay, so over there is someone raising his hand in a black shirt. I think he was first. So please, yeah, okay.
Yes, thanks a lot for your presentations. My name is Oliver Richters from Oldenburg University. And I think it's, for planet Earth, it may be important to know that its own degradation is wage-led. I think you should really think more carefully about the ecological implications of your policy recommendations. And I even suggest that this may be like a modest proposal, that this may be a topic for the next year's FMM conference. But first, as a question to you, what do you think? What measures, what ecological protection measures should we implement before we push our economy out of recession?
Okay, so then the guy from Kingston in the red shirt, same corner.
Thank you. Severin Reisel, Kingston University. I've got a question for Mark first. You suggest...
Can you speak up a bit?
Yeah, is this not working?
No.
Not very well.
Oh, right. Oh,
there we go.
There we go. You suggested that UKIP is an anti-austerity party. And I just had another look at their program, and to me it seems to be a bizarre mix of things that you could maybe with a bit of goodwill call anti-austerity, and some other things that really still very much reflect the sort of slightly libertarian roots of that party. I mean, I think I know what you mean. It arises or the popularity of UKIP arises out of that same sentiment that you described, but I wouldn't say that they're an anti-austerity party. And then I've got one for Andy. What do you think about the Corbyn proposals for People's QE? I mean, that was a bit unfortunately named, but I mean, that goes very much in the direction that you're suggesting, doesn't it? And in connection with that, we've seen when these proposals came up, these arguments against monetary financing in terms of, it will be inflationary and all that, were very fervently made by Corbyn's opponents. So how do you think we can win the political battle? And you've shown that there's a lot of academic support for it, but how can we win the political battle for monetary financing?
Okay, thanks. Next is Tom Pelly here.
How many questions should I take? So I have
as
9
much
currently,
as
so all 9.
take them, because otherwise it's getting too...
Yeah, Tom Pally, AFL-CIO. Mark, question for you. Great to get politics on the agenda. I'm sick of economics. Let me ask you a quick...
I've always considered myself a recovering economist and a lapsed Catholic. There's two sides of the same coin.
Let me ask you a pre-question. Are you for the Labour Party or SDP?
Neither. Done.
Done. Okay. All right. Well, listen. Look, if we can borrow some Pentagon terminology, we all know that Europe is a macroeconomic clusterfuck. I mean, the European social model cannot work when it's nested in or macroeconomic austerity. Macroeconomics trumps microeconomics. Now, what I don't quite understand, and I hope that you can help me here, is the politics that have kept this configuration in place for so long. And let me kind of contrast. In the US, I understand what's going on, and in the UK, I actually understand fully what's going on. I understand the politics that have locked it down. So the Koch brothers financed the Republicans. Wall Street is a whore and swings both ways. Silicon Valley is now bankrolling the Clintons and the new Dems. And you basically, in the US, you have a pretty solid upper class, middle class alliance that trumps a middle class, lower class alliance. It's also supported by racism, the immigration issues, our 401k capitalism. It's got a dose of false consciousness that gets the lower class to vote a bit, and it's also got some Republican gerrymandering and voter turnout suppression. But I don't see anything like that in Europe. I mean, I'm thinking continental Europe. I see all of that in Britain, actually, but I don't see it in continental Europe, and that's my puzzle. And there's only one, except for one thing, which I think is nationalism, which actually pushes everyone in continental Europe in the wrong direction. And that's, by the way, why I asked my pre-question, just to see where you fit in on that. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Next one is Andrea Terzi, which is this guy. Yeah, I have you on the list.
My question to Andrew, I think it's a very meaningful conclusion of this great conference where that a conference that has produced an ample supply of proposals for practical proposals for addressing the Eurozone stagnation. I have two questions on its implementation. One, where you mentioned the cost of inflation. You also mentioned that in your paper. And I'm not sure if you mean a demand pool inflation that would follow anyway from expansionary fiscal policy, not directly related to the monetary financing, or if you see an inflation coming directly from monetary financing, I'd be curious what your model is. To me, it wouldn't make any difference whether it's monetary financing or debt financed. The demand pool effect would be just the same. And the second is I wonder if why not simplifying the mechanics and finance the public investment program with say EIB bonds fully and conditionally guaranteed by the ECB. It would make a difference, I think, and would be more simple. Thanks.
Okay, could you please hand over to Henri, which is the next row?
Yes, I will make a not very interesting comment about weight. It was a technical point. We all agree that we need more public investment in the Eurozone and in Europe, but I think that the paper is simply wrong. Simply wrong. There is nothing like monetary financing. We know since a lot of years that if in a monetary system the central bank has a tailor rule fixation of interest rate, or if there is a limit on zero on interest rate, there is absolutely no difference between monetary financing and debt financing. So your paper miss the point. If there is a public investment program, people will not want to own more banknotes. They will want more debt. So there will be never monetary financing, and you cannot want to base your program of creative accounting, like to hide public debt in a strong disequilibrium in the ECB balance sheet. It is not serious. So we all agree more public investment, but it is not useful to speak about monetary financing.
Okay, thanks. Next one is Miguel, and he's over there.
Thanks. I have a question for Mark Blyth. I found it very interesting, your observation about this German export complex, and I was wondering, is there life outside the German export complex in the Eurozone? Because, for instance, Finland is now in a recession, and they're trying to cut their way out of it, which is going to fail. And the Netherlands appears to be growing this year, but it was in a relatively severe recession for a couple of years, and they also wanted to cut their way out of that. So for those countries that used to be AAA, like Austria, have lost it, and are not in the German export complex, can they actually survive inside the euro without being part of this complex? And then what's going to happen, say, what's going to be the impact of, for instance, the Volkswagen case on, say, Skoda in the Czech Republic? So is this does this have the potential to put a spanner in the works of this export complex, and then what happens then?
Okay, thank you very much. Next one is over there, Fernando, if I'm remembering right.
Thank you. Fernando Rugitsky, University of São Paulo. I could not avoid the feeling that the first two talks were kind of hard to reconcile with each other, because if I understand correctly, Onaran's talk tries to convince us that there's a possible way to coordinate our way out to a higher wage, higher growth situation. And if I understand Blyth's talk, he's suggesting that all that is just politically unfeasible. So if you could, I don't know, comment on each other's talk, I think it would be interesting. Specifically, Onaran's talk suggests that it's a win-win situation, and especially if Germans raise their wages higher than the rest of Europe. And Blyth's talk is all about the new export complex that is parasitic towards the rest of Europe. So can we provide a synthesis of that?
Very good.
Okay, next is Jörg Biebel, who sits here. Jörg Biebel.
First of all, thank you to the three speakers for their excellent presentations. My comment will primarily refer to what Andrew had to say, but I think there is no basic disagreement there that we need more public investment. And my comment is not a criticism at all. I fully agree with what you said. It's more about the question how we should phrase this argument and how we should try to convince both the public and the body politic and the media and so on. So I'm more concerned about the language and the way we try to sell this argument. What I have to say is also goes back to what Henri and Andrea said earlier. So let me start with helicopter money. I mean, in the last 2 years, we've had this debate about helicopter money. And let's remember who this helicopter stuff is coming from, right? It's this weird liberal guy who came up with this funny metaphor of dropping money from the sky, right? We know whom we're talking about. So why should we ever be excited about that kind of stuff? We're Keynesians here mainly, right? Remember, I mean, the big irony really is that this Milton Friedman comes along to prove the powerfulness of monetary policy and uses fiscal policy to prove his case, which is really ridiculous if you think about it. Because dropping money from the sky is really a decision about how to use seigniorage, how to use seigniorage over time. You can either use it to reduce taxes or to hand out transfers or for public investment, for instance. And we seem to have a strong preference here for public investment. Similarly, this argument was it Turner who made this point, the central bank should commit to whatever permanently increase the money stock, and this would raise inflationary expectations. I mean, excuse me, where's this kind of thinking coming from? This is monetarism. This is the quantity theory of money. I mean, why should we be excited about that kind of stuff? It's nonsense. Let's forget it. Okay, so what are we really talking about? What are we really talking about? We are talking about, on the one hand, using expansionary monetary policy, on the other hand, using expansionary fiscal policy. So if we focus on public investment, the question is, how do we organize public investment? We do have, Andrew, as you said, now we do have QE, so we have a central bank that goes out and buys assets and thereby creates more money. That's what central banks do. They either lend or they buy assets. That's how they create money. That's their normal business. They just switched the way they do it. They don't do it any longer passively by announcing the price. Rather, they go out and actively buy and thereby create the money. So we have that part in place. We don't need to talk about it. And this is where I come to your language when you say monetary financing. Ouch. I mean, we have this Maastricht Treaty, which has this kind of stuff in it. We had legal issues with the German Constitutional Court, with the European Court of Justice. We don't want to talk about that stuff. We do not want to suggest that the ECB is monetary financing or anything. They just conduct monetary policy. We now know that buying government bonds can be monetary policy. The European Court of Justice confirmed that. So we should leave it there. We don't want to open that can of worms again. So it's just really about how do we best organize public investment spending, and there we have different proposals on the table. You mentioned my Euro Treasury plan. You want to do it through the EIB. It has the advantage this institution exists, so that's a good thing. The bonds would partly end up on the ECB's balance sheet. Yep. They would partly end up on the bank's balance sheet. They would partly end up anywhere. We don't have to worry about it. Somebody's going to buy that. We don't need to call that monetary financing. Not at all.
Jörg, question?
Sorry.
That was a comment,
sorry.
right?
I guess it was a comment. So.
Okay, thanks very much for the comment. I have two more on my list. And then we have to close, or it's already closed. So exactly in the red hoodie, the gentleman, and then in the blue shirt, I think from the Netherlands. Yes, it's you.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Sam from the Pluralist Students Movement for Radical Change in Economics. And I have a rather political question. I really liked your presentations because I think the critique of policies put forward at the moment, the analytical critique was very accurate, and the alternative policies we should put forward very feasible. But however, I think we all know that these policies, these alternative policies, are not put forward since 30 years. And I think at the moment it looks even more unlikely that they are implemented. Since we can witness a continuing normalization and even constitutionalization of policies of austerity and surveillance. So that's my question. What are we doing if this post-Keynesian paradigm shift we are developing here is not going to happen? Or to put it even more provocative, isn't post-Keynesianism at the moment not losing the battle against authoritarian neoliberalism, just as Keynesianism lost against emerging neoliberalism? And what are our conclusions out of this? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. Last question or comment?
Johan Maaskamp from the Netherlands, Maastricht. I have a question for Mark Blyth and for Özlem Onaran. For Mark Blyth, I was also wondering, we always say that the politicians are stuck in austerity tracks, etc., but we never explain why this is the case. I mean, I haven't met any economist nowadays, more or less, who's not saying that we should leave that track. So why do politicians persist in that? And we have to, if we really want to change that, we have to understand why they do that. So maybe you could give your thoughts on that. And in your analysis, you point out the North-South problems in Europe, which are very problematic, essentially. And this leads to my question to Özlem Onaran, because you talk about wage-led growth, but that's symmetrical for all countries in a way. And in a sense, I wondered to what extent this would solve the North-South problems, which are very problematic, I think, for the European situation. So how can you tailor this policy then to solve that problem also? Maybe you could be a little bit more specific on that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So we will proceed in the same sequence as the presentations. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Many interesting things on the table. I'm not going to try and answer 9 questions or even the 4 that apply to me. I'm going to try and do this as one set of things and we can talk afterwards. Let's start with the last question, right? So why do people still believe things despite buckets of evidence to the contrary? I have spent my entire career studying this, and I wish there was a simple answer you could put on a T-shirt. But I think there's a couple of layered issues, and the first one is this. In the crisis, who got bailed, right? Well, anybody with assets, because the bank's assets are your liabilities, and your liabilities are the bank's assets, and it all sums to zero. So when you bail out banks, whether you do it the American way or the British way or very slowly, basically using Greece as a conduit through the European way, you're ultimately just doing bank bailouts. I mean, think about the bailouts to all the periphery countries. 490 billion so far, 410 billion went straight back to the private investors that should have lost their shirt. But if they were allowed to lose their shirt, your pension, your mortgage and all your shit, if you're in the top 20% of the income distribution, would have went down with it. So there's a very strong coalition for austerity at the top, because it's always austerity for someone else. And they're the people who vote. They're the people who fund politics. And that's true in Europe as well as it is in the United States. Europe is not some kind of panacea where things are different. It's the same shit, different smell. There's no real difference to it. Now, the second layer on this is, and this speaks to the sort of the divergence between our two perspectives here, is, okay, why do they keep doing it? And I'll quote something here that was said in the talk. If everyone, regarding sort of wage compression, if everyone's doing the same, it doesn't work. That's absolutely true, but that doesn't stop them doing it. Now, why doesn't it stop them doing it? Well, let's go from the top 20% who get their assets bailed to the top 1%. So Credit Suisse last week brought out a report, a new plutocracy report, which was originally done by another bank, but now it's a growth area because they've got all the money. Apparently, the global 1% now own 50% of the world's assets. And in fact, that's wildly misleading, because as we know from Piketty, it's the top 0.1% that matter. So 8 million people globally have half of everything on the planet. Why should they give a shit about public investment? They're no longer part of the public. They live in a completely different reified existence. They could burn through their assets that they've already accumulated for 1,000 years, past the melting point of ecological catastrophe, and still have half of it left over. Now, they're the people who control our politics. They're the people who own our media. Forget, whether post-Keynesians are not winning the debate. There is no debate. They've won. Now, this sounds terribly depressing, and it is. But, to try and push this in a more positive way, this is why I've spent a bit of time thinking about monetary financing. And I'm going to leap to my colleague's defence here a little bit, right? Because if we think about what's politically possible, it's absolutely true that we should really be talking about public investment. But as I've said, the people with the money have no interest, and the power have no interest in investing in the public. It's really quite simple. So that's not going to happen. And we know from a reading of Friedman that the minute we spend money on any kind of public project, it will either result in hyperinflation a la 1924 or enormous rent-seeking, and the whole world will turn into Greece. This is the popular imagination. So if you think what QE is, it's an asset swap, yes, but it's also something else. What QE is, and a nice way of bailing out your friends, is an attempt to distort every asset price on the planet in the hope that some of it trickles down and that causes investment. Which is a bit like pissing into a fire hose, right? It's just, you're going to get wet, but not in a useful way. Now, so the reason it's true, it's what it is, right? Now, the way that I think about helicopter money is you do some very basic calculations on this. That you could take half of what you spend on QE and dump 5,000 euros in everybody's accounts, and everybody who's got a bank account in Europe. I mean, it's a huge amount of money. Now, they might retire debt, which would help clean up bank balance sheets. They might invest in a new business. They might pay off the credit cards. They might go on a holiday, whatever. It's non-distortionary in the sense that it's agents making choices rather than dreaded government bureaucrats. And if the multipliers are the same on both sides, why not try it? Because it's more politically feasible once you've done QE to go through that door than it is to let's build infrastructure out to the Urals, because that's just never going to happen. They won't allow it. Now, the last one I'll say, and then I'll shut up on this, is, and I'll shut up for good, well, not hopefully for good, because that'd be a bit final, but the last thing I'll say on this is my friend Eric Lonergan and I, who wrote about helicopter money together, he was involved in a debate on a mini website in the Bank of England called Bank Underground. Perhaps some of you know this. And it's where the bank sort of relatively top-line guys go under pseudonyms and then write about sort of risky aspects of monetary policy. It's all about as risky as sort of a 5-year-old running with a spoon, right? But, it's risky monetary policy. And Eric and this guy got into it, and this is what he said, and this to me is the fundamental problem of sort of ideological lock-in, and why everything that was said here by my colleague is absolutely true and needs to be done and will never happen. And it's very simple. So this is what he said. Eric, I admit all of your arguments for fiscal superiority, monetary transmission mechanism, quickness, cleanness, bang for the buck, the whole lot. But unless the British public were to believe that the 5,000 they receive in their checking account is permanent, they'll never accept it. To which Eric wrote back, Nobody knows what that sentence means. If somebody woke up, there was $5,000 in their checking account, do you think they'd be like, excuse me, do you think this is permanent? I need to offset this against my lifetime consumption choices. No, they'll go, holy shit, this is awesome. Christmas has come early, whoop-de-doo, right? But if we think this way, and the only people making decisions are other very serious people who think this way, and then they terrorize each other with, well, you know, this is a time inconsistency problem with moral hazard, right? If this is the only way that they're allowed to talk, and like, face it, the facts, you know, most of your finance ministers you meet basically are dumb as a box of hammers, advised by people who think this way. There's no way to get into the policy debate. It's not about evidence. Evidence is everywhere. So if you basically add up the fact that you have a plutocracy that controls democracy with low-quality caliber people who are being advised by people who think that permanence and time inconsistency are real issues, guess what? I drink too much for a reason.
We will soon go and drink, but before that, some soberness. Okay, ecological dimension of it. We share a lot more common ground with the colleague who posed the question than he's aware, given his angry tone. And I want to remind that we have had several sessions here with Peter Victor several years ago, talking about managing without growth and limits to growth. Another year later, Sigrid Stagel talking about ecological macroeconomics, and I am very much informed and impressed by this work. And in my last -1 minute, I used my chance to talk about investment in purple social infrastructure. If you read the slide, there was investment in green infrastructure. As I used my -1 minute on trying to bring in a feminist element, because there has been precious 2 presentations in this conference of, 100 papers with 300 participants talking about gender in macroeconomics. I use my time for that. But if I had more time, which I will now use all of it for that, I would have said, of course, we need, and I started with that, we don't need growth, but we need human development, and we need to manage full employment and ecological sustainability and equalities in terms of wage equality, in terms of functional income equality, but also gender equality. We need policies to target all these at once, and we need public investment for that. Surely there is a very strong ecological impact on our thinking that tells us why we need green investments. So if we will spend public money, it won't be on highways, it will be on public transport. It will be on zero energy housing. It will be on renewable energy. And I'm also very aware of the fact that anything we spend on will generate growth, and that will come with rebound effects because people will then consume more. So I'm quite interested in thinking towards how we manage with lower growth rates in this part of the world, such that we can leave space for the global south. China and India will still need, or sub-Saharan Africa will still need fundamentally higher growth rates. To leave space for that, we have to radically decrease emissions here. And this is not just going to happen through increasing our energy efficiency, because this will have rebound effects. So that's all true, but it's also true that, well, you need to spend, and you need to spend it very wisely. You need to also cut rubbish. You need to cut nuclear armament. You need to cut certain consumption patterns that are very much linked to conspicuous consumption that is linked to inequality as well. The point I try to emphasize, the gender dimension in this context had one relevance as well. If you are serious about trying to coincide full employment with reducing carbon emissions, this is not just, and if you are sober to know, this is not just going to happen through energy efficiency, because efficiency of no input, neither capital nor labor, has increased to that level that we sometimes think in our wishful thinking times, if we only were to invest in renewable energy so many billion euros, we would be able to mitigate climate change. Then you need to manage with lower growth rates than we historically are used to. But where is the full employment then going to come from? And that's my feminist contribution to ecological thinking. Not my individual contribution, but contribution like İlk Karacan, who has actually first coined the term purple jobs. And that was an attempt to try to make communication with the ecological economists. But sadly, the attempt comes from the feminist side, but we see very little attempt to understand it from the ecological side. We only get angry questions here. So if you have labor-intensive jobs created in very low carbon intensity sectors like childcare, you can manage with low growth without losing the popular support. Because honestly, if it's easier for people way above the median income to talk about managing with lower growth, working shorter hours, where people below the median income are talking about getting yet another job and working for even longer hours. So that's why I try to end by saying purple and green are complementary. But anyway, thanks for the question. And I think there has been also very precious contributions in this conference already in the parallel sessions. I'll just spot out one by Maria Nicolaidi, Yanis Deformos, and Galanis on trying to bring in ecological stability with financial stability in a demand-led model with, however, supply constraints coming from the ecological side. They have a stock-flow consistent model. They're trying to also simulate it in due course, and I recommend reading that. But I think, yes, it's a good recommendation. We should, of course, always have that emphasis, and thanks for giving me the time. Now, do we disagree with Mark? I think, okay, it became very clear that there is a paradox in the current model. The thing that seems to be working for the German model or the Chinese model, export-led growth, requires debt accumulations in someone else's country. And this is equally unsustainable. And we need to find a solution to that. And this is why beggar thy neighbor policies are also not working. I'm not saying it's a win. I have a win-win solution. We have a lose-lose solution at the moment. But I'm also very aware of the class dimension. So in my scenario, there will be a class that's losing. It's not a win-win thing. It can be, however, a win-win for the working classes of the world, if you like. And this is what I think people aren't, to be precise, working people of Germany versus Greece versus China isn't exactly aware. I'll try to complement that by one technical question. I was asked about wage-led growth. Yes, all right. Well, it's not symmetrical. There are profit-led countries in isolation. There are wage-led countries in isolation too. And indeed, even in a global race to the bottom scenario, if the falls in the wage share are equivalent, there are countries who could still grow out of a race to the bottom. China is one. In Europe, Denmark and Belgium, interestingly, happen to be one. However, what we tried to find was, is there one constellation where some countries, such as Germany, France, US, dramatically increase equality. Some other countries in between, this is Austria, Ireland, or Canada, or Mexico, increase equality at a more modest level. And some other countries, like China, or in Europe, Denmark, Belgium, increase equality at a much slower pace. Can they all grow? Yes, there was one scenario where they can all grow. So I think this is telling us that, well, there will be different areas of maneuver, but particularly if countries with large domestic markets take the leadership, they leave a lot more space, particularly to southern developing countries like China, to rebalance their economy towards domestic demand, towards changing the structure of their productive infrastructure and their position in the global value chain. We could find a way of equality-led development at the global scale, or certainly at the European scale at least. The politics of that, I think all I'm saying is, well, I'm not necessarily very optimistic if we talk in private, but what I think we are doing here is doing research. That's what we do good. We are teaching. We are changing our curriculums. We are changing the future of teaching of economics. We are giving some ammunition to movements. And we are at the same time sometimes choose to be part of these movements. So if the movements come to a point to make use of this ammunition, that's the only thing that can change it. So I'm not necessarily very optimistic, but change sometimes comes in a movement, in a place in the world where you expected the least. So I wouldn't put my all bets on the end of the world is near. But I will also not say that, well, yes, we can pull that all together. If we don't do it, the end of the world probably is very soon. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Andy, T-minus 5 minutes.
So thanks for all the very rich and smart comments, and will be useful for further work in this area. Perhaps I'll start with an ecological point, just very briefly. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why I think you want to do this, if you do it through public investment, because you make a contribution there to changing the growth model. To go to what Mark said, I mean, I think if that would work, it would also be fine for me if you can credit the accounts of households. My feeling is that the ECB would be happier, getting something on its balance sheet, EIB bonds, than actually just, as it were, giving the money away, to use a sort of folksy sort of expression. But of course, that's essentially unknown. And as I say, I think the multipliers are higher on public investment. Corbyn, People's QE. I mean, the first thing I'd say is People's QE is a million times a better title than COM4P. I think that's something I would certainly say. But to be more serious, I mean, the thing is, I emphasize this monetary dominance thing in my talk. I probably made myself unpopular with a number of people in this room for doing that, but I think there is a reason for that. And what I've seen from the debate in the UK, which happened after I published this, is that Corbyn and his advisors have been attacked, as you mentioned, for not caring about inflation, right? And I think if you do it I don't know exactly what the concrete proposal is there, but as I understand it, you're open then to the critique that you're just going to go back to the 70s. You're just going to give governments the opportunity as they see fit, as the elected government sees fit, to inflate the economy. And even if that's not necessarily true, that is the concern, and I think that's why they may encounter difficulties with that proposal. I mean, Simon Wren-Lewis, who I quoted, has done quite a lot of work on monetary financing. He's now been taken on belatedly, I would say, as an advisor to the Labour Party, and he's a bit warned about that. I mean, he's in favour of monetary financing, but he's also warned about this issue of monetary and fiscal dominance. So I mentioned that in this context. The proposal is not useful. Look, I will be the first person to shut up, and stop writing this and do something more useful. If I were convinced that member state governments were willing, in the current situation with the current legal framework, to engage now autonomously in fiscal policy, in an expansion of public investment. If they do that, everything's fine. But I made an assessment that that's not going to happen, and I think there are a number of good reasons for that belief, which I won't repeat now. But that's the whole basis. Otherwise, indeed, you don't need to go down this route, and you don't need to go. It brings me to Andrea into complicated mechanics, and I agree they're complicated. I mean, one thing I can say is that the direct route that you mentioned in your intervention, that is certainly absolutely against the letter and the spirit of the treaty. If you do it indirectly on the secondary markets, at least you don't transgress the letter of the treaty. That's at least my understanding. That's the way. That's what my take of the literature anyway, but we can perhaps discuss that afterwards. And that brings me on a bit to the colleagues, including Jörg, but also Andre, who a bit this closeness to monetarism and stuff. I mean, again, I don't want to get into too many details there. Let me say, I mean, the point of this is not really the mechanical increase in the money supply, which I think was sort of implicit in the critiques you're making. The point is to find a way to get financing of public investment in Europe. And of course, if we didn't have these rules in place, the governments with the interest rates as they are at the moment could just do it anyway, right? But the fact is they're not, and they are constrained by the legal situation. So that is just to emphasize that is the way is to get the additional public spending, and that is what is going to put upward pressure, desirable at least for a certain period, on the price level, and that's what we want. It's not about the hike in the money supply; it's about getting the expansionary fiscal policy. And I think this way, in a sense, the member states are in a classic sort of collective action problem. They find it difficult with these largely intergovernmental mechanisms we have in Europe to agree, even if they really wanted to get expansionary fiscal policy. But I think, if things really do start to slide back down again, which is unclear, but then they may find this route, which would require just one sort of decision initially in the European Council, in my understanding, that would actually be a sort of path of least resistant. But I absolutely accept there are different models out there. I find Jörg's proposal very interesting. I think we need to keep this debate going. I think there are a lot of work for us to be done, to echo Özlem, a lot of work to be done by people in this room on this proposal, on Jörg's, on other people's proposals. And I don't think anybody has the Stein des Weisen, as the Germans would say, the philosopher's stone, that they think they have the one answer to all the issues. But I think in this sort of debate that we're having here, we can make progress.
Okay, thanks for the final words here. Thank you very much to all the presenters and discussants. Give me 1 minute before we go to dinner, because I have to make 2 announcements and to thank a few people. Okay, 2 announcements. First one is there will be, again, proceedings of this conference which include all the contributions of the plenary sessions, so including these 3 papers here. e.g., the European Journal of Economics and Economic Policies will publish that. You're all invited to submit papers to the journal if you like to. Second announcement, there is another interesting conference in Berlin from 26th to 28th November here at the Berlin School of Economics and Law about teaching economics. And finally, yes, I think we have to thank a lot of people for organizing this conference and for providing us with all the services and the organization of that. So first of all, the Hans-Böckler Foundation for the funding of this conference, which is surely essential for the conference. So thank you very much. I also have to thank the co-organizers of that conference, Andy, Özlem, and also Sebastian Geschert over there, and Jan Krieve. And maybe even more important, all the people who have done all the organizational work, which is Jennifer Büsen over there and Sabine Nemitz. Somewhere there's also Sarah Rögen and Martin Schottek. I cannot see them here, but yeah, thank you very much as well. And all what we said and some what we've done was streamed to the internet, so thanks to the film crew, D-Make, I think it's the name of that firm. Thank you very much for doing that. And thanks to the hotel and the hotel crew.